I was standing in the back row of the Navy SEAL graduation ceremony watching my little brother Jake receive his trident pin. My family sat 3 rows ahead, beaming with pride at their son who had made it through the toughest military training in the world. They had no idea I was there. For 14 years, they believed I was a Navy dropout, a family disappointment who could not handle military life. As the ceremony continued, I noticed a familiar figure approaching the podium. General Morrison, my commanding officer, was about to present special awards. My heart pounded as our eyes met across the crowd. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this story will show you why sometimes the biggest victories come from the quietest sacrifices. Now let me take you back to how this all started. Growing up in the Thompson household meant understanding one thing clearly: military service was not just a career choice, it was a family tradition. My father, Robert Thompson, had served 2 tours as a Marine in Vietnam before settling down with my mother, Sarah, who worked as a military nurse at the base hospital. Their small brick house in Norfolk, Virginia, was filled with commendations, flags, and photographs of uniformed family members stretching back 3 generations. Jake and I were raised on stories of honor, duty, and sacrifice. Every morning at 6 sharp, Dad would wake us with a firm knock on our bedroom doors. Breakfast was eaten in silence while he read the military news section of the newspaper aloud. By the time I turned 18 in 2009, there was never any question about what I would do after high school. I had maintained a 4.0 grade point average, lettered in 3 sports, and scored in the 98th percentile on my military aptitude tests. The day I enlisted in the Navy, our house transformed into a celebration. Mom spent the entire morning cooking my favorite meals, while Dad called every relative within a 50-mile radius to share the news. Jake, who was only 10 years old at the time, followed me around like a shadow, asking endless questions about what ships I would serve on and what countries I would visit. His eyes sparkled with admiration every time I answered, and I found myself promising to write him letters from every port. The night before I left for basic training, Dad sat me down in his study. The walls were lined with his military memorabilia, medals in shadow boxes, photographs with fellow Marines, and a folded American flag from his father's funeral. He placed his weathered hand on my shoulder and said words I will never forget: "Son, you are carrying on something bigger than yourself. Make us proud." I promised him I would. Basic training at Great Lakes Naval Base started exactly as I expected. The physical challenges, the mental pressure, the constant evaluation. I thrived in every aspect. My drill instructors praised my leadership qualities, and I was selected as company commander within 3 weeks. Phone calls home were filled with updates about my achievements, and I could hear the pride in my parents' voices with every conversation. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in November. I was called into the company commander's office, where 3 men in civilian suits were waiting. They identified themselves as representatives from Naval Intelligence and explained that my test scores and psychological evaluations had flagged me for a special program. The details were classified, but they needed an immediate answer. If I agreed, my family could never know the truth about my service. If I declined, I would continue with standard Navy training. The choice tore me apart. These men explained that my family would have to believe I had failed, dropped out, could not handle military life. They would think I was a disappointment, a quitter who had broken a family tradition stretching back generations. But the mission they described was crucial to national security, and they believed I had the unique skills needed to succeed where others had failed. That evening, I called home and spoke the words that would haunt me for the next 14 years. "Dad, I am coming home. The Navy is not for me." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and distant. "I see. Your mother will pick you up at the airport tomorrow." The ride home from Norfolk International Airport was the longest 40-minute drive of my life. Mom kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, her eyes red from crying. She had obviously spent hours trying to understand how her honor roll son, her athlete, her model child, could have failed at something so important to our family. Every few minutes she would start to say something, then stop herself, unsure of what words could possibly make sense of the situation. Dad was waiting in the driveway when we pulled up. His arms were crossed, and his face showed a mixture of disappointment and anger that I had never seen directed at me before. Without saying a word, he turned around and walked into the house. I found him in the living room methodically removing every photograph of me in uniform from the mantelpiece and side tables. He gathered them into a cardboard box and carried them to the garage where I heard the sound of the trash can lid slamming shut. Jake was the only family member who seemed unchanged by my return. At 10 years old, he did not fully understand the implications of military failure, but he sensed the tension in the house. That first night, he climbed into my old bed and asked if I was okay. When I told him I was fine, he said something that broke my heart. "I still think you are the bravest person I know, Nicholas." Whatever happened does not change that. Over the following weeks, I watched my family struggle to process my presence. Dad refused to make eye contact during meals and left the room whenever I entered. Mom tried to maintain normalcy, but her forced smiles and careful conversation topics revealed her embarrassment. The neighbors, many of whom were military families, began treating me differently. Conversations would stop when I walked by, and I overheard Mrs. Patterson from next door telling someone on the phone about poor Sarah's boy who could not cut it in the service. The hardest part was not being able to explain myself. Every instinct screamed to tell them the truth, to restore their faith in me, to reclaim my place as the son they could be proud of. But my oath of secrecy was absolute. I had signed documents that made it clear any breach of confidentiality would result in imprisonment and would compromise ongoing operations that could cost lives. After 6 weeks at home, I received my first assignment. I would be attending a classified training facility in Virginia Beach, learning skills in intelligence gathering, foreign languages, and covert operations. My cover story was that I had found a job doing construction work in Virginia Beach and would be staying in temporary housing. My family accepted this explanation with resigned disappointment, clearly believing I was destined for a life of menial labor. The training was unlike anything I had imagined. For 8 months, I learned to speak Arabic and Farsi, fluently studied international law and diplomatic protocols, and mastered surveillance techniques that seemed like something out of spy movies. My instructors were former CIA operatives, Green Berets, and Navy SEALs who had transitioned into intelligence work. They pushed me harder than any drill instructor ever had, but they also respected my commitment to the mission. My first overseas assignment came in 2011. I was deployed to Afghanistan as part of a joint intelligence operation targeting high-value terrorism suspects. For security reasons, my family believed I was working construction jobs around Virginia and North Carolina, moving frequently and living paycheck to paycheck. The contrast between their perception and my reality was devastating. While they imagined me struggling to find steady employment, I was actually coordinating intelligence operations that led to the capture of 3 Taliban commanders. While they worried about my future prospects, I was earning commendations from generals and building a reputation as one of the most effective young intelligence officers in the Navy. But I could never share any of this with the people whose approval mattered most to me. The years that followed created a painful routine. I would return from months-long deployments to Syria, Iraq, and Somalia, only to face my family's pitying looks and carefully worded questions about when I might get my life together. Jake, growing older and more aware of military culture, began to view me as a cautionary tale. During his high school years, he would tell his friends that his brother had tried to join the Navy but was not tough enough to make it through. By 2018, Jake had grown into an impressive young man. At 6 feet 2 inches tall, with broad shoulders and an athlete's build, he dominated on his high school football team and maintained excellent grades. More importantly, he had developed the kind of mental toughness and leadership qualities that reminded me of myself at his age. When he announced his intention to become a Navy SEAL, I felt a mixture of pride and concern that I could not express to anyone. Jake's decision to pursue SEAL training seemed motivated partly by a desire to restore what he saw as damaged family honor. During his senior year of high school, I overheard him telling Dad, "I am going to do what Nicholas could not do. I am going to make you proud to have a son in the military again." The words cut deeper than any physical wound I had sustained in combat. What my family did not know was that I had been promoted to lieutenant colonel and was overseeing intelligence operations that directly supported SEAL teams around the world. My security clearance gave me access to training records, deployment schedules, and performance evaluations for special operations candidates. When Jake entered the SEAL training pipeline, I was able to monitor his progress in ways that would have been impossible for a regular family member. The initial phases of SEAL training are designed to break down candidates both physically and mentally. Instructors push trainees beyond what they believe are their absolute limits, looking for signs of weakness or inability to function under extreme stress. Jake's early weeks were particularly challenging. His performance reports showed he was struggling with the underwater demolition exercises and had received negative marks for what instructors described as overconfidence leading to tactical errors. During Hell Week, the infamous 5-day period where candidates are pushed to their breaking point, Jake nearly quit twice. I watched through classified training footage as he sat on the beach at 3 in the morning hypothermic and exhausted seriously, considering ringing the bell that would end his SEAL aspirations. Using my position and connections, I arranged for him to receive what appeared to be random, anonymous encouragement. A letter would appear in his barracks mailbox with no return address containing exactly the motivation he needed to continue. When he struggled with navigation exercises, detailed maps would mysteriously appear in his gear. When he was falling behind in Arabic language, training study materials would show up in his personal belongings, with notes written in a handwriting he did not recognize. Jake's instructors began to notice his dramatic improvement and attributed it to natural resilience and determination. His classmates started looking to him for leadership during the most difficult portions of training. What none of them realized was that his success was being supported by intelligence resources that I was carefully providing without leaving any trace of my involvement. The emotional toll of watching Jake's progress while being unable to share in his achievements was immense. During his graduation from basic underwater demolition training, I sat in my car in the parking lot outside the base, listening to the ceremony through encrypted radio communications while my family celebrated inside. Mom called me that evening to share the news about Jake's success, and I had to pretend I was hearing about it for the first time. As Jake advanced through advanced training phases, my own career continued to develop in ways my family could never imagine. I was selected for promotion to colonel and given command of a joint intelligence task force responsible for counterterrorism operations in the Middle East and North Africa. My work directly supported missions that saved hundreds of American lives and prevented dozens of terrorist attacks on American soil. The morning of Jake's SEAL graduation ceremony dawned clear and bright in Coronado, California. I had flown in from Washington the night before, using personal leave time to attend the ceremony that my family believed I had no knowledge of. My hotel room overlooked the Pacific Ocean, and I spent the early morning hours rehearsing what I would say to my family if they discovered my presence at the ceremony. My original plan was simple: sit in the back, watch Jake receive his trident pin, and leave before anyone noticed me. I had done this kind of covert observation countless times during my career, and I was confident I could remain undetected. What I had not anticipated was that General Morrison, my commanding officer, and the man who had recruited me 15 years earlier would be the guest speaker at the ceremony. I arrived at the Naval Amphibious Base 45 minutes before the ceremony began, wearing civilian clothes and sunglasses that I hoped would help me blend into the crowd. The bleachers were filling with proud families, many of whom had traveled across the country to watch their sons become Navy SEALs. The atmosphere was electric, with excitement and anticipation. My family was easy to spot. Dad wore his dress blue Marine uniform, which he reserved for only the most important military occasions. Mom had chosen a navy blue dress and was clutching a small American flag. Jake's girlfriend, Amanda, sat beside them wearing a t-shirt with Jake's training class number printed on the front. They were positioned in the third row, directly in front of the podium where the ceremony would take place. I found a seat in the last row of bleachers, partially obscured by a support beam that would help conceal my presence. From this vantage point, I could see both my family and the graduating SEAL candidates who were assembled in perfect formation on the parade ground below. Jake stood in the front row of his class, his uniform immaculate, and his bearing reflecting the confidence he had gained through months of grueling training. The ceremony began with the traditional presentation of colors and the national anthem. As the flag was raised and the crowd sang, I felt a surge of emotion that caught me off guard. For 15 years, I had served my country in ways that required absolute secrecy, never receiving public recognition or acknowledgement. Watching Jake about to receive the honor and celebration that I had sacrificed was both painful and deeply fulfilling. Admiral Richardson, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Command, delivered opening remarks about the significance of the SEAL trident and the responsibility that came with wearing it. He spoke about the history of naval special operations and the courage required to volunteer for the most dangerous missions in the military. Every word resonated with my own understanding of service and sacrifice. When Admiral Richardson introduced General Morrison as the keynote speaker, my heart rate immediately increased. I had not seen my commanding officer in over 6 months, and I had no idea he would be speaking at Jake's graduation. General Morrison was a legendary figure in military intelligence circles, credited with developing many of the counterterrorism strategies that had kept America safe since September 11th. General Morrison approached the podium with the confident bearing of a man who had spent decades making life and death decisions. He was in his early 60s with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. As he began to speak about the importance of special operations in modern warfare, his gaze swept across the crowd in the systematic way that all intelligence professionals develop. When his eyes reached the back row of bleachers, they stopped moving. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, General Morrison stared directly at me. I watched his expression change from professional composure to surprise, then to something that looked like pride. He paused in the middle of his sentence, creating a moment of confused silence that rippled through the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Morrison said, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Before I continue, I need to acknowledge someone in our audience today." The crowd began to murmur, unsure of what was happening. My family turned in their seats, following the general's gaze toward the back of the bleachers. Colonel Nicholas Thompson, General Morrison, said, his voice filled with respect and authority. "You are here." The effect of those words was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence throughout the bleachers. Hundreds of heads turned to look at me, searching for the person the general had identified. My father's face went completely white, and his mouth fell open in shock. Mom grabbed Dad's arm, her eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. Jake, standing at attention on the parade ground, broke his military bearing for the first time during the ceremony. His head snapped around to look at the bleachers, scanning desperately for his brother, who was supposedly a military dropout working construction jobs across the southeast. I had two choices: remain seated and try to blend back into anonymity, or stand up and acknowledge the general's recognition. Every instinct developed through 15 years of covert operations told me to disappear, to find a way to extract myself from this situation without compromising my cover. But looking at my family's faces, seeing the shock and confusion in their eyes, I realized that the time for secrecy had passed. Slowly, I rose from my seat. The crowd turned to face me as I stood at attention and rendered a perfect military salute to General Morrison. The sound of my movement seemed to echo across the suddenly silent ceremony ground. I could see Jake's face clearly now, and the expression of wonder and disbelief in his eyes was something I will never forget. General Morrison returned my salute with the crisp precision of a career military officer. Then, speaking to the crowd but looking directly at my family, he began to explain what they had never been allowed to know. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Morrison continued, his voice steady and authoritative, "Colonel Thompson has been serving his country with distinction for the past 15 years as one of our most valuable intelligence officers. Due to the classified nature of his work, his service record could not be made public, and his family was required to believe he had left the military." The silence that followed was profound. I could see Mom's hand covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Dad had gone from shock to emotional, his marine composure cracking as the full implications of the general's words sank in. Throughout the bleachers, whispers began as people processed this unexpected revelation. "Colonel Thompson has participated in 23 classified operations across 4 continents." General Morrison continued. "His intelligence work has directly led to the prevention of 14 planned terrorist attacks on American soil and has been instrumental in the safe return of over 200 captured American service members." Jake took a step forward, breaking formation in a way that would normally result in immediate disciplinary action. His drill instructors, understanding the extraordinary circumstances, allowed him to move. The other SEAL candidates remained at attention, but I could see them processing this information about their classmate's mysterious older brother. 3 months ago, General Morrison said, Colonel Thompson completed a hostage rescue operation in Syria that resulted in the safe return of 4 American contractors who had been captured by ISIS operatives. The mission required him to spend 6 weeks undercover in Damascus, gathering intelligence that made the rescue possible. As the general spoke, I watched my family's expressions transform from shock to understanding to something approaching awe. Mom was crying openly now, and I could see Dad struggling to maintain his composure. The weight of 14 years of misunderstanding was lifting from their shoulders, replaced by a pride that was almost overwhelming to witness. The young man you see graduating today as a Navy SEAL, General Morrison, continued gesturing toward Jake, has had the benefit of guidance and support that he never knew about. Throughout his training, Colonel Thompson used his position to ensure his brother had access to the additional resources and information that helped him succeed. Jake's eyes met mine across the ceremony ground. In that moment, I could see him connecting pieces of a puzzle he had never known existed. The mysterious study materials that had appeared in his gear, the anonymous letters of encouragement during his darkest moments, the tactical advice that had seemed to come from nowhere during critical training exercises. The sacrifice Colonel Thompson has made, General Morrison said, his voice taking on a more personal tone, extends far beyond the physical dangers of his missions. For 15 years, he has allowed his family to believe he was a failure, a disappointment, someone who could not live up to their military traditions. He has endured this misunderstanding to protect both his family's safety and the integrity of operations that have saved countless American lives. Admiral Richardson stepped forward and handed General Morrison a small velvet box. The general opened it to reveal a medal I had never expected to receive in public, the Defense Superior Service Medal, one of the highest honors available to military intelligence officers. Colonel Thompson, General Morrison said, "Would you please come forward?" The walk from the back row of bleachers to the ceremony platform felt like it took hours. Every step brought me closer to my family, who were now standing and applauding along with the rest of the crowd. Jake had completely abandoned his formation and was moving toward me, his face showing a mixture of pride, amazement, and what looked like relief. We met halfway across the ceremony ground. For a moment, we just stood looking at each other, two brothers who had been separated by secrets and misunderstandings for too long. Then Jake threw his arms around me in a hug that conveyed 15 years of missed conversations, lost opportunities for connection, and a love that had never wavered despite the distance between us. "I knew it," he whispered in my ear, his voice thick with emotion. "I always knew you were not a quitter. I never understood why, but I always knew." As we walked together toward the platform where General Morrison waited, I could see my parents making their way down from the bleachers. Mom reached us first, and when she hugged me, I could feel her whole body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. "My son," she kept repeating, "my brave, wonderful son. I am so sorry we did not know. I am so sorry we could not be proud of you all these years." Dad approached more slowly, his Marine training, helping him maintain some semblance of composure, despite the emotional magnitude of the moment. When he reached me, he did something I had not seen him do since I was a small child, he cried. The man who had raised me to value strength and stoicism above all else stood in front of hundreds of people and wept with pride for the son he had thought was a disappointment. "Forgive me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Forgive me for not trusting you, for not believing in you." General Morrison allowed us several minutes for this reunion before gently calling for attention to continue the ceremony. As I stood on the platform receiving my medal, I looked out at the crowd and saw something I had never expected to see: my entire family beaming with pride, their faces showing the kind of joy and satisfaction that comes from finally understanding a truth that had been hidden for too long. The remainder of Jake's graduation ceremony took on a dreamlike quality. As he received his trident pin and officially became a Navy SEAL, I stood beside the platform in my dress uniform, finally able to publicly share in my brother's achievement. The other SEAL families welcomed my parents with a warmth and respect that reflected their understanding of the sacrifice our entire family had made for national security. After the formal ceremony concluded, Jake and I spent hours talking, filling in the gaps that had developed during our years of separation. He told me about the moments during training when he had felt my presence, the inexplicable confidence he had gained during his most difficult challenges, and the way he had always sensed that there was more to my story than our family. Understood. I was able to share some details of my work that were now declassified, helping him understand the scope and importance of the missions I had undertaken. More importantly, I was able to explain the daily struggle I had faced, loving my family deeply, while being unable to share the most significant aspects of my life with them. That evening, we had dinner together as a complete family for the first time in 15 years. The conversation was filled with laughter, tears, and the kind of deep connection that comes from finally being able to speak truthfully about our lives. Mom had spent the afternoon calling relatives and friends, sharing the news about both of her sons' military achievements. Dad had retrieved the box of my photographs from the garage and spent an hour carefully arranging them back on the mantelpiece. Jake and I made plans to coordinate our future service with him, potentially joining special operations units that I supported through intelligence work. The prospect of finally being able to work together to support each other openly in our military careers felt like a gift I had never dared to hope for. As the evening wound down and we prepared to return to our respective duty stations, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The 15 years of secrecy and sacrifice had been the most difficult period of my life, but they had also shaped me into someone capable of protecting the people and values I held most dear. I learned that day that the strongest bonds are not broken by silence, but are forged by the sacrifices we are willing to make in that silence. Sometimes being misunderstood is the price we pay for protecting what we love most. The pain of my family's disappointment had been real and deep, but it was a burden I would gladly carry again if it meant keeping them safe and preserving the freedoms we all cherish. Have you ever had to make a sacrifice that others could not understand? Have you ever been misunderstood by the people whose approval mattered most to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about the hidden sacrifices that protect our way of life. Share this video with someone who might benefit from understanding that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we never hear about. Thank you for watching, and may you always find the courage to do what is right, even when no one else can see it.